There is a chamber in the psyche that does not open through study, prayer, or self-improvement. It opens when trust is pierced. Not the small betrayals people gossip about, but the kind that fractures your inner mythology. The lover you thought would remain. The friend you let past every gate. The identity you built around being chosen, being loyal, being safe. When that structure breaks, something ancient begins to move beneath the pain. The old alchemists called it the blackening, the hour when form collapses and the soul is forced back into raw matter. This is why betrayal feels strangely absolute. It does not merely wound the heart. It removes the mask from the wound. And behind that wound waits a forbidden possibility. What if the betrayer is not only outside you? What if every outer deceiver awakens an inner one, a hidden force that has long been trading truth for comfort, instinct for approval, soul for temporary relief? To enter this subject correctly, we must descend without excuses, because betrayal is not only a tragedy, it is an initiation. In Jungian terms, betrayal does something brutally efficient. It constellates the shadow, not only the shadow of the one who harmed you, but your own neglected material, the instincts you silenced, the boundaries you postponed, the quiet warnings you translated into hope. The ego hates this moment because it wants a courtroom. It wants a villain, a sentence, a clean moral frame. But the psyche is not a courtroom. It is a furnace. It uses shock the way alchemy uses fire, to separate what only looked united. This is where the figure of the inner Judas begins to matter, not as a cartoon of evil, but as a psychological function. A traitorous force within that sells wholeness for 30 coins of ease, approval, control, fantasy, numbness, the comfort of not having to change. Every time you stay where your body says no, every time you betray your own discernment to preserve an image, that inner bargain is being made. Outer betrayal often hurts so much because it reveals an older, quieter betrayal that was already happening within. An old manuscript from the Eastern Mediterranean tells of a metalworker philosopher named Leontius, a man admired for his discipline, his insight, and the rare calm in his speech. He took in a younger student, Dorian, who seemed sincere, eager, almost reverent. Leontius showed him everything: the timing of the bellows, the sacred ratios of heat, the prayers spoken over sealed vessels. Then one winter morning the student disappeared, taking with him a pouch of silver, several pages of notes, and a letter of introduction meant for Leontius alone. The town called it theft. Leontius called it a revelation, because what broke him was not the money. It was the humiliation. He saw with painful clarity that part of his wisdom had depended on being admired. The betrayal did not create that dependency. It exposed it. This is the first occult law of treachery. The traitor rarely plants the poison. He uncovers the place where it was already fermenting. And that is why the wound feels sacred and unbearable at once. It reveals not only what was done to you, but what in you was still secretly hungry to be affirmed. This is where most people make the fatal mistake. They turn betrayal into a hunt for the guilty and call that healing. But in depth psychology, obsession with the offender is often a defense against meeting the deeper material. It is easier to condemn than to confess. Easier to say, "They deceived me," than to ask, "What in me needed the illusion so badly?" Alchemy always begins with prima materia, the base substance no one wants to touch. In ordinary life, that substance appears as humiliation, dependency, self-deception, the sick realization that your pain is entangled with your vanity. You did not just lose a person. You lost a narrative about yourself. Perhaps you believed your loyalty made you untouchable. Perhaps you believed your devotion guaranteed safety. Perhaps you mistook endurance for love. Betrayal shatters these secret equations. It reveals that the psyche is not transactional. It does not reward goodness with immunity. It initiates through exposure. And the first exposure is always this: where did I abandon myself before anyone else abandoned me? There is a Sufi tale about a wanderer called Nizam, who kept a lamp burning outside his doorway every night. Travelers said it was hospitality. His students said it was devotion. But the lamp served another purpose. Nizam feared the darkness inside his own house. One evening, he welcomed a guest with soft speech and patient eyes, a man who listened well, praised generously, and seemed grateful for every kindness. Weeks later, the guest vanished before dawn, carrying with him Nizam's notebooks, a box of coins, and several hymns never shared with anyone. Nizam erupted in fury and ran through the bazaar calling for justice. Yet when he returned, breathless and ashamed, the lamp outside had gone out. In the darkness he noticed, for the first time, a broken panel behind a shelf, and inside the wall, vermin had been nesting for years. The theft had not created the infestation. It revealed it. So it is with betrayal. The betrayer does not place darkness in you. He extinguishes the light you were using to avoid seeing what was already there. Jung warned that what remains unconscious does not disappear. It returns as fate. Betrayal is one of fate's sharpest languages because it pierces the ego exactly where it feels most morally certain. The persona says, "I was good, therefore I should have been safe." But the soul does not obey that bargain. It is not interested in protecting your image. It is interested in making you whole. So in the black phase, the NIGREDO, your ideals are dragged downward into the soil to see whether they were rooted in truth or only polished for display. Was your kindness alive, or was it a strategy to avoid rejection? Was your trust genuine openness, or denial wearing the perfume of virtue? Was your loyalty devotion, or fear of being left alone? This is why betrayal feels like descent. You do not only lose someone, you lose the map by which you understood yourself. And in that darkness, the inner Judas appears, not as a monster, but as a mirror, showing every place where you traded discernment for belonging. In Hermetic symbolism, there is a vessel called the vas hermeticum, the sealed container where opposing forces are held together until a new substance is born. Psychologically, this is the stage most people try to escape. Betrayal tempts you toward two false solutions. The first is revenge, which keeps your soul chained to the one who wounded you. The second is premature forgiveness, which often hides fear of your own anger. Both are evasions. The real work is harder. You must contain the fire without letting it spill into destruction. Let grief speak. Let rage speak. Let humiliation speak. Not so they can rule you, but so they can be decoded. In alchemy, poison is never dismissed too quickly. It is distilled, examined, reduced to essence. The same is true here. Your strongest reaction is usually guarding a buried treasure. Obsession may be guarding lost power. Shame may be guarding self-respect. Despair may be guarding an unlived life. The inner Judas does not only wound. It forces the hidden material into the vessel, where truth can finally begin to separate from illusion. After containment comes a more dangerous operation: projection. At first, the betrayer looks like pure darkness. The mind paints them in one color, so that you do not have to face the complexity inside yourself. This is the ego's moral convenience. It would rather simplify than transform. But if you remain with the wound long enough, an unsettling thought begins to rise. The one who betrayed you may be carrying qualities you exiled from your own nature, not their actions, which remain theirs, but the energy they awakened in you. Perhaps they embody the selfishness you were never allowed to admit, the ability to choose yourself without apology. Perhaps they embody your buried cunning, your strategic intelligence, your capacity to leave what no longer fits. This is why betrayal can become catalytic. It forces a retrieval. In alchemical language, this is the separating of elements. You begin to divide fact from fantasy, injury from interpretation, their deed from your unfinished lesson. And in that separation, the spell weakens. The traitor stops being an idol of darkness and becomes a messenger of disowned power. A late antique story speaks of a philosopher named Marcellus who wore a small bronze seal around his neck. He told his students it was a symbol of clear judgment, a token passed down from a forgotten master. Over time, the seal became more than an object. It became his certainty, his ritual before every lecture, the thing he touched whenever doubt began to rise. One evening, before a public disputation, he reached for it and found only an empty cord. The seal was gone. His thoughts scattered. His voice failed. He stood before the crowd exposed, unable to hide behind the charm he had mistaken for wisdom. Later, he learned that the seal had been taken by his most devoted student, the one who praised him most faithfully. When confronted, the student said, "You no longer trusted truth. You trusted the object that helped you avoid uncertainty." This is the anatomy of betrayal. It removes the talisman, the relationship, the role, the image, the habit. Whatever you used to feel stable is cut away, and beneath that loss a deeper task appears, to stand without charms, without illusions, without borrowed certainty. Once the talisman is removed, another layer of the work begins. Betrayal leaves behind a residue, a psychic aftertaste that can bind attention for months or years. You replay conversations, imagine confrontations, check their life from a distance, rehearse explanations that will never restore what was broken. In occult language, this is a form of enchantment. Your life force becomes tied to the site of the wound. Jung would describe the next task as a withdrawal of libido, the reclaiming of psychic energy from an object that has become overcharged with meaning. This cannot be done through slogans or forced positivity. It requires discipline. First, name the hook. Is it rage, longing, humiliation, injustice? The fantasy that one final answer will set you free? Then name the payoff. What do you gain by staying bound? Identity as victim, avoidance of loneliness, the secret comfort of not moving on. Every time you see the mechanism clearly, the spell weakens. Every time you redirect attention into a concrete act, you recover a fragment of sovereignty. This reclamation of energy prepares the next alchemical phase. Albedo, the whitening, not optimism, not spiritual bypassing. Albedo is what remains after decomposition has done its work. It is the cold, clean clarity that rises when illusion can no longer pretend to be love. Here the psyche begins to speak in sharper sentences. I was loyal to a fantasy. I confused intensity with intimacy. I mistook being needed for being cherished. I called self-abandonment devotion because the truth felt too lonely. This stage is humbling because it restores agency without offering comfort. You begin to see how you participated, not in their deception, but in your own refusal to know. And that distinction is everything. Because the moment all power is placed in the betrayer, your soul remains bankrupt. But when you ask, where did I trade discernment for belonging? Where did I silence my body to protect a story? The mind begins to clear. Albedo is the first return of inner light, the moment accuracy becomes more precious than innocence. But clarity brings a second grief, one many people never expect. It is no longer only they betrayed me. It becomes I betrayed myself in order to stay. I abandoned instinct to preserve attachment. I silenced the alarm in my body because truth threatened the role I was playing. This is the deeper wound beneath the event itself. In depth psychology, we might call it the wound of self-desertion. You do not merely mourn the person or the loss. You mourn the years spent negotiating against your own soul. And that is why this phase can feel like the dark night in its purest form. The old identity begins to die, but the new one has not yet taken shape. The loyal one, the fixer, the endlessly patient one, the one who could endure anything for love or belonging. All these masks begin to crack. What remains is frighteningly simple. Who are you when you stop performing goodness to earn safety? Sacred suffering begins here, not as drama, but as honest mourning that refuses to decorate the lie. In Hermetic iconography, after purification comes conjunctio, the union of opposites, the alchemical marriage. This is where betrayal stops being only a wound and becomes a test of integration. At first, treachery splits the personality in two. One part hardens into suspicion and vows never to trust again. Another part still longs for tenderness, closeness, and the right to remain open. If you choose only one side, you become divided. Either you return to innocence and repeat the pattern, or you become armored and call bitterness wisdom. Conjunctio asks for a rarer discipline. Softness with boundaries, discernment without cruelty, compassion without self-erasure. Jung might call this the beginning of the transcendent function, the emergence of a third position that can hold tension without collapsing into extremes. This is when the betrayer starts shrinking back to human size. No longer a god of suffering. No longer the center of your mythology. Just a figure who played a role in your initiation, while your real task becomes learning how to love without abandoning yourself again. Then comes rubedo, the reddening, the phase where insight must become embodied or it remains only beautiful language. This is where the work turns practical, almost severe. The inner Judas rarely appears as a dramatic catastrophe every day. More often it arrives as a small bargain. One more message to the person who already taught you not to trust them. One more compromise against your own standards. One more indulgence to numb the ache rather than face it. One more postponement of the life you know you must begin. This is how the soul is sold, not once, but in increments. So the red work demands form. Name the temptation as it appears. Delay it. Interrupt the trance. Redirect that energy into a concrete act. Movement, prayer, writing, cold water, silence, work. The ordering of your environment. Alchemy is not merely symbolism. It is disciplined transmutation of force. Rubedo begins when you stop asking why this happened to me and start asking what must now be built in me so this pattern no longer finds a home. There is one final danger in the aftermath of betrayal. It is the temptation to make the wound into an identity, to decide that this pain proves you are unlovable, foolish, cursed, or somehow marked for loss. But that interpretation is the last chain. It turns initiation into a prison. In the deeper traditions, every descent has a hidden purpose, not to return you to innocence, but to return you to truth. This is where the inner Judas reveals its final teaching. It shows you the difference between devotion and dependency, between sacrifice and self-erasure, between love and the hunger to be rescued. You were not betrayed so that your spirit would collapse. You were betrayed so you could see where it was already divided, where you wore masks for closeness, where you traded truth for belonging, where you confused suffering with meaning. When that lesson is integrated, the wound does not vanish, but it changes its function. It becomes perception. And that is the philosopher's stone in psychological form, not in vulnerability, but integrity. The pain remains, but it no longer owns your future. It becomes gold.